Hello, my name is Anton, and today is our fourth lecture of the program Audit at Fingertips. And today's topic is exceptions and issues. We will go over the process of identifying exceptions during the planning and fieldwork assessment and testing procedures, and we'll discuss how to handle those exceptions and issues, how to run them through the issue life cycle, assess their extent and criticality, present them to the stakeholders, and document action plans. Let's go one by one over each item. Okay, let's start from basics to understand why do we need issues, why they're so important. Remember, according to internal audit standards, the audit mission is to provide assurance. And assurance is objective examination of the control environment. In fact, the assurance is an audit opinion, which audit is given, and this opinion tells whether the controls in the scope of the review, whether those controls are reliable enough to mitigate the risk. And when internal audit comes up with an opinion, this opinion has to be backed up with evidence, with artifacts, with documented observations. And if the evidence is relevant, if the evidence is sufficient, in that case, internal audit can give sufficient assurance grade to the audit results. However, it's still possible that we may encounter the opposite situation when the artifacts that we collect and observations we made, they either insufficient to demonstrate effectiveness of the controls, or they may even demonstrate ineffectiveness. And in that case, of course, internal audit cannot give sufficient assurance. Internal audit in that case give partial assurance or room for improvement or any other grade which is normally documented in internal audit methodology. And in this case, exceptions and issues is something that connects audit work with the final grade in the report, because the issues that we identify and document, those issues, they drive the report rating, the final assurance statement. Therefore, issue is something we document when we identify the deviations of the control design from good practices or procedures and standards, or the control execution from the design. And thus, issue might be split into two main types. The first type originates from the control design, which we assess during the planning phase, and the second type originates from the control execution, which we review in the fieldwork phase. Therefore, the first one is about deficiencies or flaws we find in the control procedure, while the second type relates to the situations when the control procedure, the design of the control is fine, but the execution, the control implementation, is not following the design. Because the design issues originate from design assessment, their structure mirrors the questions that were asked during the assessment of the controls. First is very simple, is the absence of the control. You see the examples here. You may familiarize yourself with those examples. So we have a risk, but we don't have a control. For instance, payments are not approved, not reviewed at all. And by the way, in this lecture, I'm going to give examples. They're absolutely 100% fictional, and they're very basic, very simple. Most of them take the payments processing process as an example, and the issues that we're going to review they're very basic. Normally, the payment process are mature and they don't have issues like that. However, I did that for a purpose to simplify the examples and show the prominent exceptions, prominent issues, which is easy to understand. So yes, first type is when we don't have a control. Second type is the control relevance. Business rely on the control. However, the control the business relies upon, it's not relevant to the risk. For instance, we reconcile daily payments, totals, the balance totals, but the problem might be in the individual transactions. In that case, your totals will be the same. All the payments are sent to a wrong beneficiary. Third type is the responsible person. You remember the same questions we ask when we assess controls. So who is doing the control? We may observe that during the design assessment that the person assigned for the control execution, the requirements to that person might allow not the best person to be assigned. For instance, it might be a person with sufficient authority, or like an example, there might be no separation of duties when the same person creates and approves payments, or the control might be executed by a person with a non-relevant team, for instance, not possessing the right skills. Number 4, it's about the place where we put the control in the process, or frequency if it's a cyclical control. In the first case, the control might be executed too early, or might be too late, or the frequency might not be sufficient. So for instance, we have some risk that may materialize every day, but the control is monthly, or we approve payments when they are processed, which doesn't make any sense because it doesn't mitigate the risk. And a couple of others. First one is control not sustainable. It means control will not be able to remain effective in extreme situations, like we have a sudden spike of the transactions, and the person who is reviewing them manually may not be able to cope with that amount of transactions. Or, for instance, one person risk when a single person is responsible for the control and nobody is backing this person up. In that case, if person is off sick, who is doing the control, right, and how the process is going to work in that case. And the last one, and probably you may see that a lot, control is designed well, but the evidence is insufficient. And because we don't have evidence, we cannot prove control was executed. If we cannot prove control was executed, we cannot assess how was it effective or not. And it's not only about internal audit, actually it's about management, because the controls are not created for internal audit. Controls are created by management for management, because management is owning the risks in the business process. One point to remember. If you find an issue in the design, in that case, you don't need to do operating effectiveness testing, which we reviewed in the last lecture, because, well, as long as you know that control is ineffective, it's not going to mitigate the risk. It will ineffectively perform. However, when you find an issue in the design and the control is working, internal audit is still expected to perform the impact assessment. You just need to check, is there any consequences of the bad design. Fine. Now, moving on to execution issues. They follow the same pattern as the design issues. However, they have a bit of different flavor, because the design is nice, and the execution issues relate to the cases when the process doesn't comply with the design. So, for instance, we have a control introduced, we have a policy or a procedure, but control is not performed. Nobody is taking the actions to mitigate the risk. Or control is performed, but the person assigned for the control execution doesn't meet the design requirements. For instance, the right team. However, the level of the person is not sufficient. A junior person might be assigned to control that is to be executed by the middle management. The same about control wrong place or frequency, especially the last one, because frequency requires regular attention, like entitlements review, or entitlements approvals, like in our case. So approval might be placed or might be given for the entitlements after the access is provided. Number 4 is about sustainability mirroring. It's when the backup is required by the control design of the procedure, but nobody is assigned. And the last one is evidence. Again, the design may require detailed evidence, but in fact, the evidence doesn't contain all the information required. For instance, if we approve something via emails, like transactions, right? The emails might be in place, but they cannot be referred to specific transactions just because it's just the word approved, but there's no reference to a transaction, there is no timestamp of the transaction, etc. So we have an email, but we cannot understand which transaction was approved with this evidence. Also to remember, if you find an issue, find an exception during the testing, operating effectiveness testing, you still don't feel confident, you're not sure if there is a systemic problem or not, the best way to handle the situation is to extend the sample, increase the sample size, and see if this you see that repetition of this exception or maybe not. Okay. Moving on to the issue life cycle. This is the way we need to go if we identify the problems. And as you may see, there are a lot of steps. Might look too complicated. However, that's still important, and each step is very simple. Number of steps which we see on the screen is created to ensure we go baby steps, and every step is easy to understand. And this is important to follow this process because issues is something which requires special attention. Issues are always they always create room for potential debates between between the auditors and auditees, and therefore you need to be very careful with the statements you come up with, and that's why there is a process behind that to ensure the smooth review, smooth discussion, and smooth landing the issues. As you may see, everything starts with the testing or assessment, where we may identify the deviation from the right state of the things. Then we identify it as an exception. As you may see, as you saw on the previous slides, the exception always goes before an issue, and therefore every issue would have an exception, but not every exception would have an issue. And why is that? They will see in a few slides after this. So first we create an exception. We assess the exception. We assess how critical it is, how large it is. We perform consequence risk assessment. We perform extent or scale assessment. Then we verify whether the facts we collected they are accurate. We didn't miss anything or didn't misinterpret anything. Once it's confirmed, we draft the issue. Once the issue is drafted, we present it to the stakeholders who accept the issue, provide us with an action plan. That's a very important step. And in the end, the issue lands in the audit report. Let's go over each step in details. First, consequence. What's the risk? The main question everyone asks when they see an issue is, so what? And the structure of that answer, so what, is actually two answers. The first one, what's the risk? Potentially, what we may expect to happen. What bad could happen with the current design or with the current execution, right? And the second one is there any material impact? Is there any impact on business, any losses, monetary losses or asset losses? And therefore you may see the two examples given. The first one, which says attention, means that there is an exception and there is a risk, for instance, unauthorized access. However, internal audit checked the data, checked the logs of user access, and internal audit didn't find any cases where this unauthorized access granted to users was used, right? However, the second example, marked as alert, this is absolutely different animal, because although the the issue was found in the payment process, and the issue relates to lack of duty segregation. And in addition to that, internal audit reviewed the transactions and found that because of this deficiency, the user could approve all transactions, and it resulted in authorized transfer of $25,000, and it's still the question if the company can recover this loss. Now, once we review the risk associated with the exception we identified, and we think that yes, there is a risk, that there's something that is worth attention, next step is to understand what's the extent, how big it is. So for design issues, it's simple. It's all about checking the business impact. For execution issues, is not that straightforward. Of course, there are issues like lack of segregation of duties in the critical processes, like payment processing. Of course, even a single execution issue will lead execution problem will lead to an issue. However, when you deal with low risk examples, it might not be that straightforward. For instance, if you're testing the end user computing, for instance, or laptop management, you may see some small deficiencies. For instance, like in this case, you might find a single laptop didn't receive the antivirus update. Of course, it's not good. However, it might be one-off exception. In that case, it doesn't signify that, it doesn't mean there is a systemic problem behind that. Well, maybe the user didn't connect to the corporate network for 3-4 weeks, and that's why the update was missed. And if you have a sample of 40, and this is just one exception, that's all right. Well, it's not all right. It's not all right. However, it's not a big problem. However, if you see that there are a couple, probably 3 exceptions out of 40, it might mean that there is more, and it's not a one-off, but it's a symptom of a systemic problem. And therefore, you need to check, maybe you need to extend the sample and see if you get some significant percentage of the laptops. And you can check each exception, check the root causes, just to understand if there is a single problem behind that, or different problems, different one-offs. So it's worth investigating. Next step, factual accuracy. So if you identify that there is a risk associated and the extent of the problem is material, now definitely something that may be worth of turning into an issue. In that case, you need first to confirm that your observations, the facts you collected, they are properly interpreted and they are accurate. In that case, you need to put together, like on this slide, in this example, put together a summary with reference to your evidence, and you need to attach those evidence or provide it via cloud links, depends on your practices, and verify whether they're available to your auditees, and send an email or have a call, have a meeting to discuss the statement like that. And the result of that should be a confirmation or probably additional comments, additional information. So auditees should agree with you that the facts you noted, they are accurate. On this slide, you see a similar example, but for the execution issue. So as you may see, the differences in the first example, design issue, we refer more to the procedures, refer more to the process, we refer more to the requirements, while where for execution, we refer more to specific items, for instance, transactions. So it's not about procedures, it's about business data. Once your factual accuracy confirmed, Or maybe it's still possible that stakeholders may send you additional comments, additional facts, additional evidence, which will prove that actually there is no risk. In that case, you may reconsider and drop the exceptions. The next step is to, if the factual accuracy is confirmed, next step is to draft an issue. What does it mean to draft an issue? It means that to put all your observations and your analysis into verbiage. And issue, there are different concepts of how to draft an issue, and this lecture will review. Probably it's not the best one, however it's good to use this concept as the foundation on which you can build up the structure which will fit more into your business context. So this is 4C concept, which means that for every issue you should write what's the concern, context, cause, consequences, and an additional issue level. So, and this is kind of the questions you need to answer. For concern, what's wrong? For the context, what's the process in which we have the problem? The cause, who didn't do what? What was the systemic cause, the root cause which led into the observation that the audit made, and consequences, actually that's the risk, and that's the impact. Oh, probably we can describe the impact in the context section as well. And the level, it's about giving the understanding, the audit view on how critical the issue is. And here you may see on those slides an example of an issue taken from the previous slides about lack of duty segregation in the payment process. Just want to remind that all those examples are absolutely fictional. In the concern, it's the easiest because we just need to write what we saw. So we saw that segregation of duties is not enforced because we see that the same people created and approved the transactions. Right? Easy. Context might be a bit more difficult because it will depend on the reader who expects to see what. And remember, the issues you are going to draft, they will be brought up to the senior management level and probably to share it with the teams which are not part of the audit. Therefore, it means that this wording will be reviewed by the people who doesn't know the context of the audit. They are cold readers, and even if something goes without saying for you during the audit, and even for auditees with whom you are working on very closely, right, it might not be that straightforward for cold readers. But generally, what you may want to include in the context session is about the process description, the purpose of the process, maybe some specifics of its execution. You may also describe what's the extent of the problem here. So in this case, you see the percentage of users with Make Your Check Your Access. You may add a reference to the procedures that regulate the process or policies, and also the impact, the business impact might be put either here or to consequences section, depending on what you prefer. Now the cause it might be most important, the most complex and non-obvious part. Sometimes you may think about, oh, this is the cause because this system doesn't support that. However, it's not always the case, and on the next slide you'll see that we will review the root cause analysis in detail. And generally what I want to focus your attention on, that's very important, because when you fix the cause, you fix the issue. You fix all instances of that issue totally with just a single action. They will not repeat if you fix the cause. Therefore, that's twice as important to address the root problem. Consequence, it's more about the risk. Like in this case, we say that the segregation of duties, lack of segregation of duties may lead to the unauthorized payments to be processed. And issue level. For issue level, there is no single recipe. You need to seek guidance in the audit methodology. Normally, audit methodologies or issue management policies in the organizations, they provide some guidelines, criteria for grading the issues. It might relate to its extent, so you see That might be the impact of a single process or the country, regional, global business, and its materiality, right? Is there any impact or not, or impact on the assets? It's not only about cash losses, and of course, you need to think about regulatory and reputational impact. And nowadays, you also must think about AI. Is there any risk associated with usage of AI? Let's review the root cause analysis. Again, there are a lot of different concepts, different methodologies for root cause analysis, and we're not going to review all of them. That's not the goal of this video. Let's review something very simple and straightforward, which is 5 whys approach. What does it mean? Why 5 whys? Because we're asking the question why at least 5 times before we stop. And I just want to reiterate why the root cause analysis is very important, because the findings we saw, for instance, that the transactions were approved by the same people, created and approved by the same people, just a symptom. It's not the root cause. The second is when you're fixing the cause, you're fixing the whole issue. And if the root cause may relate to multiple processes, once you fix it, the issue will disappear from all the processes, from all the users impacted, all the employees impacted. That's why it's important to go to the very root of the problem. And of course, once you address the problem, all dependent controls will become effective, or at least there is no chance they might be ineffective because of this root cause. And now in our case, an example how to get to the root cause. So first was the question, why those transactions were approved by the same employee? Well, we get the answer because the system doesn't ensure that segregation of duties principle is followed. But why? Well, nobody configured that. Why nobody configured that? This is business, the configuration is with technology, but business didn't require it, right? Now, why business didn't require it? Simple, the payment procedure doesn't require it. Well, why we don't have it in the payment procedure? Because the process owner didn't consider this risk when they designed the process. So this is the root cause, likely, and you see how far it is from your finding, from the approvals. It doesn't have anything to do with the system configuration, although it's immediate cause, but not the root cause. Technology is not managing the payment process. Technology is just providing the tool to manage it. It helps to manage the payments, however, not the requirements. Okay. Assume we finished the wording, we put it in a document, and we are ready to show this issue to the world. However, before doing that, before sending the issue to our auditees, it's very important to send it over to your audit lead or your audit owner or your senior auditor for a cold reader's review. During this review, the following items should be taken into account. The cold reader clearly understands the logic behind the cause and effect connection. So the cause, how it relates to the finding, how the finding relates to the risk, and what's the impact. There should be clear language, clear idea how particular cause led us to the problem that needs to be fixed. There should be clear understanding of the concern. Why it's important, why it's critical, why it needs attention. We need to include the evidence, or at least our observations, and people who is going to read that should understand what internal audit observed or reviewed to get to that conclusion. And issue level. Issue level should communicate understanding of the criticality. Once you get your wording reviewed and probably amended, likely, you may go for the next step, which is to schedule a call with stakeholders or schedule a meeting if you're on site. and discuss the issue. And it's good to send the issue wording to stakeholders before you meet. Of course, except for the cases when the observations, the findings should be kept confidential. For instance, in internal investigations, things like that. Now, when you go to the call, you meet with stakeholders and you discuss the issue, and you should make sure that you get right people on the call. And by the way, if you share your issue in advance, it will help you to get right experts, right managers. You make sure you discuss the issue with the right level of the management, that you have right representation. Otherwise, you may spend time, and in the end you'll find that your audience doesn't have enough authority to agree or disagree with your observations. Also, well, and this tip number one, it depends on your relationships with stakeholders. It depends on the company, depends on the policies, depends on the methodologies. However, if you're close, semi-formal, you have semi-formal communication lines with your auditees. You may actually, before going into a formal call, you can get in touch with your direct contacts, your main contacts on the auditee's side, and just give them a quick heads up. Keeping the audience small because it's not formal. In that case, it will help people to get understanding, ask questions, and in that case, maybe you may also get the idea how the issue is seen by the other side, and come better prepared on the call in your turn. And tip number two, you have to write meeting minutes, and when you write meeting minutes, it's nice to use AI capabilities, especially if this is a video call, of course, if you have any tools handy. And now, when you start discussing the issue, it's not a formal process. It's not a procedure when you take steps A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and you get to the end. You step into less formal area where your discussions they're more like negotiations over the issue wording which you brought up to the call. And here are the main areas which are likely to be discussed. And those items will be challenged by stakeholders, and sometimes they are fairly challenged. And why fairly? Because remember this well: the auditees always have better knowledge than auditors, because auditees are working all the time, year after year, on the processes and systems in the tools and scope, while internal audit know very well, by the way, internal audit know very well risks and risk management and control management. It's different. So this is something auditors know much better than auditees, but the scope of work, the context, so this knowledge is with auditees. So you might not be surprised that on this call, auditees may come up with some area with information about the areas, procedures, systems, controls that were not mentioned during the walkthroughs because auditors didn't ask about them, and stakeholders, they just didn't know if this is important or not, and that's why they didn't brought it up during the walkthrough sessions. And this is the challenge for the auditor who is leading this call, because this new information, new facts, new scope pieces should be quickly validated, whether it's information correct, whether it's information relevant. Once you consider this is relevant, you need to integrate it into your picture, in your mind, and once integrated, you need to quickly assess how it would impact the issue wording. Sometimes you may deal with the situations when there is no control, for instance, and on the call you've been told that there is another team who's doing that control after. However, internal audit didn't know about that. It just was part of the scope was missed, and you see that there is no risk. In fact, next area that might be challenged is the consequence section. Stakeholders, and it's not only about just push, and sometimes people just really may not understand why internal audit think that the risk is real. And again, this brings us back to the beginning. Our stakeholders may not be professionals in risk management. This is something that they're not focusing on. And this is the duty of the auditors to explain, to educate the stakeholders, to explain why the risks that are mentioned in the issue wording, why those risks are important. And you may use the risk scenarios description to show the different ways how risk may materialize, to make it easier for the people to understand you and agree with you. Next is the extent. Stakeholders may say, okay, we agree, the context is correct, and we do not disagree that the risk is real. However, what you're saying relates to a very small fraction, very small part of our processes, and it's definitely not something that evidence a problem. In that case, especially when we say that we find 3 laptops without the updates, or like 5 laptops without antivirus database updates, here it may help to explain the concept of sampling population, because you may have 40,000 laptops in your firm, and if on a sample of 100 you found that 5 of them they don't have updates, so you may extrapolate this to the whole population. Well, for 100 maybe you need to sample more, but this is the general idea. So yes, you didn't review all 40, however you reviewed a part of it. Well, nowadays it might be probably easier to test 100%. Anyway, with the tools we have, AI, Excel, etc. However, even in that case, when you're covering 100%, it still might be challenged for the scale of the problem, and you have to be ready to respond to the questions like that. And issue level might be considered too severe. However, it's probably one of the easiest items, because your methodology or your issue management policy will offer you the specific criteria you can use to show. So okay, fine. So these are the criteria, and this is the issue. You see where the issue components, they match the criteria of the scale of reputational, regulatory impact, monetary impact, AI model criterion, etc. Okay, a few tips how to make the presentation smoother. Remember, it's less about knowledge, it's less about hard skill. Negotiations, it's more about soft skills. It's about how you speak to your auditees, how you communicate what you found, because the same information may be delivered with different tone, within the different context, with different or absence of emotional part of the message, and also there are different people on the other side, and they may interpret your message in a different context. So therefore, a few tips. Try to avoid surprises. If possible, do not come up out of the blue with the issues, with the problems. Think about it. People may think that everything is fine, and which is worse, they may communicate to their senior management that everything is fine if you don't give them a heads up. If you create, just keeping the facts with you may create impression that everything is on the audit, everything is okay, and this message will be communicated to auditors command chain, and if it's not okay, actually you make people to go and tell that they were wrong. It's better to avoid the situations like that. Again, I will repeat it, except the situations where you're required to keep your findings confidential, like forensic audit, for instance. Next, let people speak. your main message in the issue wording. Even if you disagree what they're trying to deliver, just let people speak. Share the initial feedback, share emotions, because nobody likes the issues. And listen. Keep listening. The word auditor comes from Latin. Latin, it means the listener. If you feel that you may not properly integrate into the issue, understand the relevance of the facts shared, stick to the risk. Always think about risk. Issue, it's not about have or have not. It's not a checklist. It's always about the risk which is not sufficiently mitigated. And if you see that the new information may evidence that risk is actually mitigated, well, probably you need to withdraw the issue. Or if they say something and you see it doesn't relate to risk mitigation, in that case you just can say that. It's easy. Stick to the risk. Set the context that controls, so you come up the issue, it's not for the audit. It's for the risks, and risks are owned by the management, not by the audit. Controls are created by managers for the managers. Remember, people might be different. Not every it might be simpler. Whatever personalities you deal with might be simpler. Just focus on your goals. Focus on what you're trying to achieve, and remind your partners that you all work on the same goal, to deliver value to your organization. It's just the different lines of defense. Try to establish good relationships, and where I'm going to record another video about how to establish good relationships on the audit. And in general, it's more about the soft skills application. Try to establish good relationships from the very beginning. Be anticipative, don't be pushy, listen to people, even if you think that maybe what they're saying to you it's not entirely relevant to the scope or to your questions. Sometimes people love when someone is listening, and it creates more credibility for you. Try to establish good relationships way before you may raise an issue. And watch your language, watch your vocabulary. Avoid using the words but, avoid using the words knows. Replace them with and, replace them with however, yes, and additional context, right? I don't disagree instead of I disagree, or I agree. Everything could be delivered in different way. Probably you may say that it's more formalities. Well, there are some words that are very important to avoid, because they always treated. They always negate the positive effect of the communication. So, for instance, when you say something you agree, but people read it as but will nullify everything before but. Or when people just don't like no, people like yes. Doesn't mean you should agree with everything. It's more about the way you communicate your disagreement. Moving to the next step, which is issue acceptance. Issue discussion, issue presentation ends well, and finally, after a few rounds, we reached the agreement on the wording. We did some amendments. We'll probably add additional information to the context to make the issue look more comprehensive. And finally, we agreed on the wording. Now we need to get acceptance. We need to get a confirmation that the management agreed on the wording. It's nice to have it in the form of minutes, or probably in the form of a direct email, and have it for future use, because again, remember, your issue might be reviewed by the people who are not part of the audit and auditee teams, might be senior management who is outside of the context, and you may get the question, who did agree with it? And if you have this document demonstrating the agreement handy, it will save a lot of time for you, and avoid any misunderstanding or misinterpretation of what was said, what was agreed, what was discussed. However, it's the journey is not finished yet, because once we agreed and agreed that there is a problem, we need to fix it, because the risk is not mitigated just by the fact we found that something is wrong. We need to take action to fix the problem and mitigate the risk. And the action plan must be provided by our stakeholders. Internal audit may give a recommendation, however, better to avoid even giving recommendations, because you will be validating how the risk was mitigated. When your auditors will report that action plan is finished, it may happen way after the audit is done, month, sometimes like almost up to a year, depending on the scale of the issue, the criticality, etc. And the internal audit will review and validate whether the risk is mitigated, and if internal audit would give recommendations what to do, and in the end stakeholders will not implement it as implied, in that case, how can internal audit raise an issue on that? Because if internal audit will raise an issue, they will be told by auditors, this is what you said, this is what you told us to do. Therefore, internal audit is requesting the action plan from auditors. Of course, you need to challenge it, you need to give a feedback. However, it's kind of feedback. You cannot say that everything is 100% right, but at least you can point out to the actions which are not relevant or not sufficient. And the action plan must contain two parts: tactical and strategic. Tactical action, strategic solution. The tactical action means that the auditors should identify all the cases in business processes where the risk materialized or about to materialize the created and mitigated risk, and fix them. So, for instance, we have the cases when the people can approve their own payments. This should be fixed, meaning the privilege of approving payment should be revoked. We must be sure that the people, they don't have those privileges combined. They should be revoked, and probably the compensating control should be implemented. Kind of a workaround will mitigate the risk until the strategic solution is delivered. And second point is strategic fix, strategic solution, which will address the root cause. So tactical action addresses the symptoms, strategic solution addresses the root cause, and once the strategic solution is delivered and implemented, we can consider risk is mitigated, and issue the remediation is finished and sent to internal audit for the validation. And here you see an example of an action plan. Again, everything is absolutely fictional. It doesn't have any relevance to any live process, live companies, or my experience, specific personalities or examples. Here you see our issue with the lack of segregation of duties. It contains of 6 steps, 6 different steps to address that problem. It's not only about to revoke the access, it's about updating the procedures, about to revoking access rights, and about implementation of the controls, and doing respective review of the transactions just to identify if there's additional impact. Because internal audit reviewed the limited sample. However, if we see that there was the situation which could allow the risk to materialize, we must, auditors must do the full population review to identify if there are any fraudulent transactions or not. And of course, number 5, that's very important, because the ongoing monitoring should be implemented, because we implement the control. However, in the same time, we need to monitor whether the control performs as expected. However, more to come on that in future lectures, because that's a separate topic, how to monitor the control performance. And of course, training and communication. Remember, the problem was that our process owner didn't consider the risk, so probably some additional education on the risk management and the risks associated with the payment process is required. In addition to that, I want to add that sometimes we may deal with the situations where we need to use the plan-for-plan approach. What is that? Plan-for-plan is used when auditors need more time to think about what's going to be the strategic solution. So they understand what could be the quick fix, the tactical action. However, because of the infrastructure complexity or probably short terms of the audit, short deadlines, they cannot come up right now with a specific action plan how to fix the root cause. And in that case, they may request more time to put together the feasible action plan, and they can ask for a plan for plan. So they commit to perform analysis of possible solutions until the particular date. In our case, it's 31st of May 2026. And internal audit would expect on this date so the auditors to share the final plan similar to the previous slide, and internal audit should review this plan, challenge it as it were during the audit, and agree or disagree with sufficiency and relevance of the actions taken. Important. The challenge of the action plan is very important. Again, once you agree on it, you will deal with it when it's delivered. And if you agree on something that doesn't mitigate the risk, it will return to you, because if you find at the end it doesn't mitigate the risk, so the question is, so why did you agree on this plan? Okay, and we're getting to the final part of this story. Now when we get the action plan, we made it a part of the issue. By the way, the action plan is always a part of the issue. We just let the issue wait for the reporting phase of the audit, because the next step is when we're creating the report, audit report. We will include the issue into the report, and this issue will drive the audit rating. Next step will be to validate. That's something that happens after audit is finished, and I want to tell you about additional type of issues which might bring us to the gray zone. You may deal with the situations when the auditors may ask you to remove the issue from the report because they have already fixed it. So it's still possible that they may quickly do a retrospective view, look back to verify that no real business impact occurred during the audit period. They may fix the root cause if it's not something serious that doesn't require a lot of work. They may come back to you and say, well, dear audit partners, can you please remove it because there is no issue anymore, means there is no risk, and this is why the issue must not be part of the audit report. In that case, again, so you need to check your methodology and see what methodology, if the methodology says something about these cases like that. However, the baseline is the issue must remain in the audit report. The question why, and the answer is it will remain in the audit report because you're not given the assurance of the current state. You give assurance also for the period of the audit report, for the 12 months. And even if the issue is fixed right now, it was still, the process still were exposed to the risk for the last 12 months, even there was no business impact. Well, of course, if there was business impact in that case, there shouldn't be any discussions about removing the issue from the report. And the fact that they fixed the issue, it doesn't negate another fact that for the 12 months, the risk was not mitigated. In addition to that, remember, you're validating the issues, the action plans delivery and issue remediation and risk mitigation. And therefore, you need to review and validate what was done. And you may not necessarily have time on the audit. That's why the issue stays in the report. That's all for today. We fully covered the topic of issues and exceptions, reviewing their roles, their types, design and execution. We reviewed the exceptions assessment for the associated risk and extent. Also, we reviewed the issue drafting concept of 4 C's, cause, consequence, concern, and the context. Reviewed the 5 whys analysis of the root cause, the way of presenting the issues, and submission of the action plan. So next time we will talk about the issue validations, because this is where exactly we reach the state of risk mitigation and where internal audit provides assurance on the control effectiveness. Thank you very much for watching. I hope this lecture was useful, and see you next time. Bye bye.